At 9:33 a.m., we continue with the show this morning, and it's time now to link up with Africa Muslims Agency. We're talking with the regional director of Africa Muslims Agency, Hafiz Hassan Choonara. Now, the AMA obviously is in Lebanon, and they have been for many years doing a lot of work there in the country. And the key issue here is about healing Lebanon. We know that the country is in turmoil at this point in time, and joining us right now live, and you can view this interview on our Facebook page and also on the YouTube channel with the director or the regional director of Africa Muslims Agency, Hafiz Hassan Choonara.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Brother Inayet. Once again, a pleasure to be on your show and Salam Media.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yes, wonderful having you with us as always. Now, we are led to believe that Hafiz Hussein obviously is traveling through to Lebanon, and he's about to land in Lebanon, looking at the projects that Africa Muslim Agency obviously has been embarking years after years. And we know the situation in Lebanon dire at this point in time. And perhaps, to start off with, just to paint a picture as to why Africa Muslims Agency needs to be there on a regular basis and working on the various projects in Lebanon.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Yes, as you correctly mentioned, Brother Inayet, the African Muslims Agency, permanently based in Lebanon for the past many years, alhamdulillah, undertaking various campaigns and projects on a daily basis through the support of donors. For example, the campaign, the bakery project, which runs every single day, producing over 4,000 bread bags, which benefit the Syrian refugees. For example, the Basamat, the Psychosocial Services program for traumatized orphans and widows. The Dignity 10 project, rebuilding of campsites on the borders of Syria, and many other campaigns that we run on a daily basis. But it's imperative that we support our teams on the ground, alhamdulillah, and to further enhance that work. And that's the purpose of Hafiz Hussein's trip, which will be landing, inshallah, in an hour and a half in Beirut, Lebanon, to further enhance the work, to further grow the work, to look at more sustainable campaigns and projects, and a number of them that we will be launching hopefully this week, inshallah. One of them being a school, the other water project, boreholes in Lebanon, benefiting the refugees there. And I just want to make mention, right now we know Lebanon is going through a very challenging time. One is you have the refugees that are living on the neighboring towns of Syria, and then you have the economic crisis that Lebanon facing. For example, right now there is a shortage of fuel, electricity is a problem, internet's a problem, basic commodities like medicine, etc., is a challenge, and access to these basic medications is a problem. We also know the hospitals right now in Lebanon, across Lebanon, no matter where you are, because of there being no power, no electricity, and no fuel or diesel to run the backup generators. As a result, Brother Inayet, you have people literally losing their lives in a hospital. I imagine, just a few weeks ago, there was an explosion of a tanker in Akkar, north of Lebanon. I've been there many times. And the people in Akkar were then taken to the hospital. Now, you get to the hospital, a facility that's meant to give you the necessary medical attention that you urgently need. But you get there and there's no electricity, no power. The medical equipment cannot function. And thus, some people losing their lives, sadly. So, alhamdulillah, the African Muslims Agency supporting 4 hospitals with solar power units. That will last them a lifetime, inshallah. And this is made possible through the generosity. So the purpose of the trip, again, to further enhance what's already being done and to grow on that and to bring more sustainability amongst the communities in Lebanon.
Yes, and I think one good thing about Africa Muslim Agency, and obviously having a permanent presence in Lebanon, and it certainly does help because unlike you'd find sometimes that you have a crisis, you go in there, you provide relief, you come out. But I think this permanent presence gives you an opportunity to evaluate and assess the situation on a day-to-day basis, and that is where the value add actually comes in, Hafiz Hassan.
Absolutely, brother Inayet. We have the at the time of need or the crisis or the crisis hour where we go in and we assist with mostly food, shelter, and medication. But what happens thereafter, and always with the African Muslims Agency, alhamdulillah, we have teams on the ground to implement, for example, your secondary phase, your repatriation programs. If you just look at, for example, the refugee camps in Biqa, Al Yasmin camp, you look at Asar, you look at Akkar, and you have so many youth. If you just break it down, we have orphan children running around the campsite. Most of them not going to school, not getting an education because the parents don't have the means. Remember, in Lebanon, the families aren't allowed to work in the city, so they work around the campsites, in the fields, earning less than $1 a day. Yet they still have to pay rent for the space they're living in, the tent they're living in. They still have to provide food for the families, send children to school, and what they earn from the fields is less. It does not even cover the rent. So the people living in the unmanaged camps, mostly widows and orphans, are left are vulnerable to abuse in having to pay that rent. What happens to the many youth sitting in the camp? You have many young men who are physically challenged, who came from Syria, injured because of conflict, unable to work, but they're sitting in a camp. Some of them 16, 17, 18, 19, not doing anything. We have to implement programs and set up structures where these young men can go and earn, get some skill so they can use it to benefit their families. Many a time you see these young men marry young girls, and within 2 to 3 years, that girl is back home, with a baby or two, and it's an ongoing cycle. How do we break that? Are we going to keep giving food parcels to the refugees? They're already there 11 years, Inayet. Are we going to keep giving food parcels to them for the next 10 years? Or we can implement programs so that people may benefit. They can benefit themselves, their families, and whether they go back home to Syria or they continue staying in Lebanon, they're able to provide for their families. And also, one thing I want to mention, Brother Inayet, psychosocial services support. We can give food, we can give shelter, we can give medication. But what happened to that orphan child who witnessed trauma? What happened to the widow who witnessed her husband being abused, or she herself was physically abused? How do we expect her to continue a life of normality? How do you expect a child to lead tomorrow? When we say lead, not perhaps being a governor or a president, but lead a home, being a husband. Many a time I saw in the tents, in the refugee camps, a man beating up a woman. Why? Because they've experienced so much trauma. She's experienced trauma. They get married at a young age and they don't know how to handle a home. And as a result, there's abuse in the home. So psychosocial services is key. And that's why the African Muslim Aid implements these other initiatives to bring a life of normality, humanness, and dignity.
Well, I think, make a very, very good point and a very powerful point in terms of the psychosocial services, because to many of us, sometimes, we think loosely about humanitarian relief and humanitarian efforts that are taking place, but that is just taking care of physical needs. The psychological needs, I think, are paramount, absolutely important. And as you mentioned, that, it also leads to other social dynamics that actually playing out, apart from just what they've experienced in the past, it what they experience in the camp itself. Like you say, you got newly wedded couples and coping mechanisms in terms of, dealing with your spouses, dealing with the families. These are absolutely important aspects. And if you want to build a strong society, this is an area that needs a lot of focus, Hafiz Hassan.
Absolutely, brother United. You need to focus on. I mean, remember, if maybe 10 years ago we were giving the food, shelter, and medication, thinking perhaps they'll be there for maybe a few months and go back home. Many of them are still there. If you look at Sabra and Shatila, the Palestinian refugee camp, and you look when they came into Lebanon, they were told they'll be there for 2 weeks. It's been more than 4 decades that they're there in Lebanon. And you got generation after generation being born in Sabra and Shatila, and it's only so many square kilometers, and they're not allowed to move out of this campsite. Yes, they can go into the city perhaps to buy the basic commodities or through the necessary authorities get education. But once they get that, where do they go? And so you have generation after generation being born in this campsite, and they're living in a squalor condition. And how do they have what coping mechanisms do they have with daily life? We talk about the psychosocial services support and tying into that. This week, inshallah, we'll be launching a school in Lebanon, basically assisting a school with a number of orphan children who need education. We can leave. We have a choice. We can either leave these orphan children running around a campsite day after day. Years will pass, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, no education, and as a result, that will be their life. Or we can educate them, empower them, so they can have some sort of rights and dignity and move on in life. Brother Inayet, I relate the story to you. I went into Akkar, North Lebanon, where this explosion happened. I went to a tent, 9 siblings. And, I interacted with the 18-year-old youngster. and he came to Lebanon when he was 11 years old. And obviously, being one of the head of the siblings, he was communicating with us. The parents, they lost their parents in Syria, staying with the 90-year-old grandfather. And so when you communicate with this youngster, you can see already he's missed 8 years of education. He's been in this campsite for 8 years, no education. And so I asked him, so okay, where's your brothers? He explained. I said, where's your three sisters? He said, no, they married off, and the youngest sister was 13 years old. And so you ask, okay, so like, why did she get married so young? It's not because they want to get married, but because the grandfather and the family cannot support the girls, and as a result, they marry them off at a young age. And many a time they come home after 2 3 years with one child or two children, and so families marry off the young girls because they don't have the means to look after them. So if we put structures like education, like psychosocial services, these young girls and boys can go get a chance to education, can be upskilled, and get married when it's the time to get married, and able to lead homes as homes are meant to be led.
Yes, certainly, Hafiz Hassan. And obviously, from time to time, we need to be reminded about what is going on around the world, and particularly in areas like Lebanon, where obviously the need is also great, like it is in many other areas where Africa Muslim Agency is involved. Now, just looking at tapping into the generosity of the donor community, what do they need to do?
It's Alhamdulillah, the South African community is a giving community. They've always responded to the plight of people from South Africa to the rest of the globe. And here again, we're saying this country is facing challenging times. One is the refugees, the Palestinian and Syrian refugees that are in need of your urgent assistance, as well as the Lebanese communities. And we've seen many of them still haven't recovered from the Beirut blast that happened just over a year ago. And right now they're facing difficult conditions, and we need the donors to support Heal Lebanon by visiting Africa Muslims Agency.co.za. Donate towards the Lebanon campaign. We know there's many challenging situations around the globe. In Afghanistan, we just got feedback from our teams on the ground, and we know there as well there's challenging times. But right now, Hafiz Hussein will be landing in Lebanon in perhaps another hour and a half in Beirut, joining our teams on the ground, and showing and advising the donors, to show the donors their generosity, how it's already impacted people on the ground, and how we can do more and how we can benefit in the process. We humbly ask the donors out there to follow the AMA social media pages for live updates from the ground from Lebanon, and donate towards Heal Lebanon by visiting the website africamuslimsagency.co.za.
Hafiz Hassan, as always, it's a pleasure talking with you and linking up with you, from time to time. But for now, we wish you all the best, and everybody else at AMA. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept. Allah reward your efforts. And until we talk again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
تقبل الله منا منكم وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.